Chapter 11. Chapter 11. Third person's POF. The next day Lucien was seen standing in front of a campfire he made in front of his home, while being surrounded by batches of baked cookies he made. Seriously Lucien, what are you doing? Yesterday before you started working on the dagger you spent the entire day baking cookies, which is unlike you. You have never missed a single day of your training until yesterday. Just what is so important? Medea asked with a bit of worry in her voice. I'm going to be 7 in a few days, so I want to do it before then. I have been working on this magic since I was 1 year old. As soon as I learned I could do magic, I've been studying every chance I could get to do it. The idea was just there, like I knew what I had to do, if that makes sense, Lucien attempted to explain. I really hope she's buying it. I'm trying to replicate a magic I've seen in my last life, so I really hope this works. If it does, I'm sure I'll be extremely powerful, Lucien thought. He then turned towards his mother and said in an unexpected serious tone, Mother, what I'm about to do is extremely dangerous, and as I'm doing this I want you to promise me that you won't interfere or interrupt me, as it can mess up what I'm doing. Medea was taken aback by Lucien's tone. This is the first time Medea has heard Lucien sound so serious before. She has heard him sound serious before, but it wasn't anything close to what he sounds like right now. Medea and Lucien had a staring contest for a while before Medea broke it and sighed. You're really serious about this, huh? Lucien nodded, sighing once again. Medea nodded her head. All right, I promise I won't interfere. Lucien nodded his head and turned towards the campfire. He first took out the twin daggers he made and laid them in front of him on the ground. He went and took 5 batches of cookies and sweets he made, which he put his heart and soul into making, putting his hopes and dreams on every ingredient and cookie. He released one final sigh and threw the batch of cookies into the fire. He then started praying out loud as if he was reciting something he wrote down. Oh, Hecate, goddess of enchantments and mysteries profound, whose ethereal light guides the arcane paths unwound. In reverence, I beseech thee, hear this earnest plea. Grant me thy wisdom, thy grace, that I may see. Mistress of crossroads, whose triunescence reigns. Thrice-formed deity, keeper of cosmic chains. In this realm of spells, where mysteries entwine, I kneel before thee, seeking divine guidance. Illuminate my spirit, O Hecate revered. With thy sacred knowledge, let my vision be cleared. Grant me insight into the weavings of magic's art. Teach me to wield spells with a steadfast heart. Great Hecate, wielder of the enchanted flame, whose wisdom transcends and bears no earthly name. Grant me the prowess to harness power untold. Through incantations and symbols, let thy secrets unfold. As I tread the paths of incantations and rites, guide my hand, empower my spells with mystical lights. Infuse my workings with the essence of thy grace, so my sorcery may weave through time and space. May my intentions be pure, aligned with thy will. As I seek to bend the forces, yet be mindful still. Grant me mastery over the arcane's subtle call, to honor thy realm and never let my spirit fall. O venerable Hecate, hear my fervent plea. Enshroud me in thy presence, make thy teachings free. As I dedicate myself to the mysteries that bind, grant me thy favor and wisdom unconfined. In thy name, I beseech thee, O goddess of magic's lore. Lead me through the labyrinthine paths to explore. In thy guidance, let my spells thrive and persist. In reverence, I honor thee, Hecate, the ever mystic. Thus, I pray and offer homage at this homemade shrine. May thy brilliance within me forever brightly shine. Hail to thee, Hecate, goddess of the arcane art. Guide me through the workings of spells, never to depart. Medea's eyes looked like they were about to pop out of her head when he heard him mention that goddess. Many may not know, but Medea was once a divine priestess to Hecate herself, so hearing Lucien pray towards her was a shock. After she was hearing Lucien's prayer she started to shake in fright. She wanted to scream out loud, go there and stop him and smack some sense into him. What the hell is he doing? She thought to herself. Just as she was about to do something about it, she remembers his serious expression and the confidence he had, and the promise she made. Meanwhile, as Lucien finishes his prayers he hears the sweet voice of the woman inside his head. Now this is quite a surprise. I don't think I remember the last time a mortal has prayed to me that wasn't even my descendant. All right, little demigod, you've gotten my attention. Lucien nodded his head and started speaking to her in his head. I've mostly said what I wanted in my prayer. Please offer me your guidance in the magic I'm about to perform. And why should I do that? Hecate asked, genuinely curious. I'm willing to go on a quest for you. Lucian said seriously. There was a short pause before the sound of laughter, like bells chiming, could be heard inside his head. Ha 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 ha. Lucian stood there still wearing his serious expression, expressing the seriousness in his offer. This is simple hilarious. You, a tiny demigod, are willing to go in a quest, just so I could guide you in a small spell you want to do. I don't even know what to call you, brave, ignorant, a fool? I'll go with brave please. Hecate just scoffed when he heard him. You're a funny one aren't you? Lucian just shrugged his shoulders. That's not for me to decide. You sure are an amusing demigod. Now I'm curious who your father is. I detect a hint of death within you, but it's not too overpowering, like it normally is for the sons and daughters of Hades, but everyone knows of their pact between them, so it can't be them. Is it Thanatos? No, that can't be, it's too small to be his. Hey, I'm still growing, Lucian jokes, before quickly covering his mouth. There was a loud silence between them which just made Lucian more scared the longer the silence prevailed. Which was thankfully broken by Hecate laughing, much to Lucian's relief. He ha 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 he, what a cute little demigod. Is your father the god of jokes or something? Lucian shook his head. You were right the first time. This left Hecate quite shocked, so Hades was the one to break the pact first of the big three. What pact? Lucian asked, playing the clueless child act. Since you've entertained me so, I guess I wouldn't mind sharing. The big three, which are Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, made a pact together that they wouldn't father any more children, fearing their potential. I still can't believe it was Hades who broke it. Doubt it. Lucian scoffed. Oh, you sound confident of yourself. Why is that? Hecate asked curiously. Look who we're comparing. Scoffs, you have a point, but still no child of Zeus has been reported, Hecate added. And never have I, Lucian added. Another good point. Hey, want to make a bet? Lucian asked. How did this go from a prayer to help you do your little magic, to you being so foolish as to making a bet with a god? Are you already tired of living, boy? 1. My magic isn't little, just my height. And 2. Isn't that a no then? Now I never said that, did I? But what could you possibly offer or want for you to make such a bet? I'm willing to become your slave for all my life. Seriously? If you're willing to bet something like that, it makes me believe you are certain of your chance of winning. Now why would I agree to something like that, and pray tell, what do you want in return? I want to become your student. If I win, I want you to take me in as your disciple of sorts. Interesting offer, but you still haven't told me why I should agree to such a thing when you sound so certain of your chances of winning. Lucian just shook his head. I'm not though. So you are willing to sacrifice what you mortals value most, which is your supposed freedom, if it means you at least have a chance to become my student. Absolutely, Lucian said, emitting an aura of confidence. You are the most interesting mortal I have met, and being at such a young age at that. I just can't help but ask why? Why are you willing to throw such a thing away? Lucian just looked confused. Isn't it obvious? It's because you're worth it, he said, sounding even more confident than before. Even Hecate could feel how sure he was of himself. Fortunately, Hecate wasn't in front of Lucian, or he would have seen how much his words had affected her, as she became a blushing mess that even her furry little friends were looking at her with confusion and concern. After not hearing from her for a few minutes, he tilts his head and calls out to her, hello? Before Hecate could respond, Lucian grabbed another batch of cookies and threw them at the fire. Sorry, the offering must have burnt out, Lucian apologizes. Luckily that gave Hecate time to recollect her as she said, you know what? Sure, we can make the bet. Lucian silently pumped his fist. Okay then, let's swear it on the river. Why? You don't trust me to keep my word? It would be foolish of me if I did. Good, you were taught well. I was taught by one of the best after all. Lucian said with pride in his voice. Oh? And who is that? My mother, Lucian nodded proudly. I'm going to need a name, kid, Hecate said while scoffing. Oh, well, some people know her as me, the witch of betrayal. There was another short pause before Hecate started laughing once again. Ha 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 ha, that little lassie is still alive? Ha 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 ha, and she's your mother? I'm surprised you made it to reach this many years in age then. Hecate then unexpectedly stopped laughing and asked, wait a minute, child, so you mean to tell me your dad is Hades and your mother is Medea? Yes? Lucian asked, confused as to why she would ask that. Whoa kid, talk about heritage. If you live a long life you could potentially become one of the strongest demigods out there, but you're going to have to suffer an equal amount of pain to make it. Lucien nodded. I know, that's the whole point of all of this. I'm preparing myself. The magic I'm trying to perform would perhaps make it easier, and that's why I'm doing everything I can to at least be your student and learn from you. You sure are honest. Lucien just shrugged his shoulders. I have no reason to lie. Very well, then let's first start by the bet. I, Hecate, goddess of magic, swear on the river Styx to take you in as a disciple, if I lose the bet against you. Lucien nodded and said out loud, much to his mother's horror, I, Lucien Blackheart, swear on the river Styx to give up my free will to you should I lose the bet. Lucien, what the hell did you just do? Medea couldn't help and scream out to Lucien as the sky rumbled, signifying their agreement being made. Chapter 12. Chapter 12. Third person's POF. After Medea's scream, Lucien held out his hand in a stopping motion and held out a finger, saying to wait a minute. Medea, seeing this, wanted to go and wrangle his neck, but she held herself back. She knew how dangerous it was to interrupt someone when doing something like this, so all she could do was grit her teeth and hope for a good outcome. Once Lucien said his piece, although he couldn't see it, Hecate raised her brow in astonishment. He actually went and did it. Does he even understand the implications of such actions? No, he does. I don't know why, but I have a feeling he does. Furthermore, he's the son of Medea, and for as long as I know Medea, I know she would teach her son everything she knows, even if she was a little unhinged. So still knowing the implications, he went and did it. What a crazy child. Image of Hecate. Hecate then continued with what they were discussing earlier. Now that is done, let's discuss the reason for your prayers. Lucien nodded his head. This is a magic I've been researching for years. I already have the incantations ready. Now I just need your help, oh goddess. Very well, but in order for me to do this you must accept a quest of mine later on. Do we have an agreement? Lucien nodded his head. We do. You may begin. Lucien nodded his head once again and aimed his hands towards the daggers on the floor. He then closed his eyes and started to remember the incantation he came up with for this specific spell. In shadows deep, where mysteries swell. With whispered words, my power I tell. Trace on, through arcane design. In fiery forge, my strength shall shine. Earth's embrace, foundation firm. Metal's edge, the blades are firm. Ignite the flames, let power surge. Trace on, the elements converge. As soon as he finished his words, information started appearing in his head about the weapon in front of her, all information on how it was made. An excited expression soon came across Lucien's face. Hecate made a sound of clearing her tone, making Lucien realize what happened. His ears grew red in embarrassment. Sorry, he squeaked out. Now was that all? Hecate inquired. Lucien shook his head. No, this is a two-parted spell. I will now begin the second part. Lucien then closed his eyes and started saying another incantation from mind to reality, a conjuring art, in the void, where creations start. Project, the essence of my desire, bring forth the image, set the world on fire. No limits bind, no chains restrain, in the realm of projection. I shall reign, manifest, my will to be. A reality born from the void, set free. As soon as Lucien finished saying it, daggers started appearing. Lucien was using his control of precious metal to make them float next to him. The daggers were exactly the same as the ones on the floor, they were an exact replica. Lucien nodded proudly with a large smile on his face. Lucien bowed his head. Thank you, a goddess, for your help. I would be forever grateful. Hecate just scoffed at that. Yeah, sure, don't worry about it. Now if that is all, I'll take my leave. Wait before you go, Lucien said, stopping her. What is it? Hecate asked. Lucien went and grabbed all the remaining baked sweets he made for this occasion and threw them all in the fire as an offering. Here for you as a thank you gift. Although Lucien couldn't see it, Hecate smiled slightly as she went away. When he felt her leave, Lucien let out a sigh of relief. He turned towards his mother and gave her a thumbs up. Medea, once she saw it, nodded her head and looked at Lucien with a bright smile. When Lucien blinked, she disappeared from Lucien's view and where she was standing. Slap. Lucien was then thrown to the ground as Medea reappeared in front of him. She slapped him so hard across the face a large bright handprint was seen on his cheek. Lucien was on the floor with a shocked expression, holding his burning cheek, and looked up to his mother in surprise. When he looked up at her with his shocked expression and watery eyes due to the pain, he saw Medea looking down at him with tears in her eyes. She then crouched down and enveloped Lucian in a tight hug. How can you be so smart and so stupid at the same time? Did we not discuss this? The gods are not something to be messing with. It could lead to serious problems. And the hell was that about a bet on losing your free will? Are you crazy? Or you just make me want to wrangle your neck, young man. Medea screamed as she held his face with both of her hands. Medea then sighed while looking at his face and brought him in for another tight hug. Oh, I can't stay mad at you. But don't think I'm forgiving you that easily, young man. You will tell me what bet you made that you willing made that bet. Medea screamed once again as she broke the hug and held his face, to which Medea sighed once again and brought him in for another tight hug. I'm sorry for hitting you, but what you just did was very idiotic, so I don't regret doing it. And I will do it again if you are thinking of doing anything remotely similar. The only one which is okay is your father. So started talking, mister. What is that you were willing to risk your freedom for? And it better be good. If it's something stupid, I swear to the gods, Lucian, I will hit you again. Lucian sighs. He couldn't be mad at his mother for hitting him, as she was mostly concerned for his safety, so he started explaining. Basically, the goddess couldn't believe my father would be the first one to break the oath of the big three, so I made a bet with her that if my father was really the first one, I would give up my freedom to her, and if I was right, she would take me as her student. Now before you get mad at me, just look at who my dad is up against, so I'm willing to say my chances are really high. And my intuitions told me I was right, and as you would always say, trust your intuition for they shall never fail you. If anything, I was just following your advice. Oh, so you're saying it's my fault now? Medea said with a hand on her hips as she was now standing up looking down on Lucian as he was explaining. No, mama, Lucian said sheepishly, kneeling in front of her with his head down. Medea scoffed as she said, very well, you said your intuition was telling you were right, so I guess you're right on taking this gamble, so I won't stay mad for long. Lucian let out a sigh of relief and stood up. He then turned towards his mother and bowed his head. Sorry for worrying you. Now if you don't mind, I need to work in the smith. Thanks to my new magic, a lot of ideas have opened up. Medea sighed again and nodded her head. You are forgiven, you can go ahead. Lucian nodded his head and went back inside, but not before picking up his 2 daggers and dispelling the ones he made. But at hawk it doesn't mark ywld it wo ark, doesn't enade magic sirhu. S. T. F. U. IT works because I said IT works, and the explanation why IT works is because of Medea's skill which she taught the MCIT gives him the ability to use fate magic without the need of magic circuits. So high-speed divine words, Kozoku Alt, rapid words of divine, is a skill that assists with magical incantations via a power to activate thaumaturgy without the use of magic circuits. The language of the Age of Gods, back when words played a heavy role in spellcasting. As such, it is a power long lost by modern magi. It is particularly useful for direct attack magic. I copy and pasted that from the wiki on Medea's skill from the Fate universe, so once again, IT works cause I said IT works. Hope you all enjoyed. Chapter 13, Third Person's Pof. Lucian was seen once again inside his smith, polishing the tip of an arrowhead. His concentration was then interrupted by the sound of his mother knocking on the door. When he looked up, he saw her looking at him with concern and a hidden sadness in her eyes. Lucian tilted his head when he saw her expression. What's wrong? Why are you looking at me like that? Honey, why are you rushing? Now Lucian was confused. What are you talking about? First, it was the daggers. You did all that at once to the paint. You couldn't even stand up straight from exhaustion. Then it was the thing with your magic and the bet you made, and now this. You were always someone who took their time when doing something, but all of a sudden you're acting like there's a time limit upon you and are rushing to meet the deadline. Why? Lucian stopped what he was doing, and looked even more confused, but it wasn't about what Medea said, it was about himself. She's right. Why am I rushing? Lucian thought to himself. I don't know. I just feel like I have to do everything very quickly. That I should get ready for something, but I just don't know what, so that's what I'm doing, Lucian said while shrugging his shoulders. Medea just sighed and shaking her head she looked at Lucian as she said, just try to relax. As she was leaving, all Medea thought was as expected of the son of the Lord of the Underworld. He can feel it. My time is slowly coming to an end and he can feel it. Lucian, seeing her leave, just went back to what he was doing and finished the arrow he was making. When he was done, he looked at it all over and examined every inch of it. He nodded his head but decided to enchant it later as his magic hasn't recovered from trying on his magic earlier with Hecate. With nothing else left to do, Lucian went out and started practicing with his scythe. He would start practicing on how to transition between weapons. He would start with a scythe and switch to a sword, or start with a chain scythe and switch into a bow. He trained to the point he felt both his arms were about to come off, and slowly made his way inside and found his mother waiting like always with another one of her conjectures. Lucien went and downed the entire thing in one go, and shook his head when he was done to shake off the nasty feeling. "Thanks, Mum," he said as he went up and got showered and dressed, which he then proceeded to sleep until the next day. The next day Lucien was in his smith enchanting a singular arrow. As it's an arrow it should have enchantment of piercing, ignores a percentage of the target's armor, making the arrow more effective against heavily armored foes. Lightning speed, increases the arrow's velocity, allowing for faster travel and minimizing the chance for enemies to dodge. Explosive, causes a small explosion upon impact, dealing area of effect damage to nearby foes. Lucien then got to work and started concentrating on doing everything right. After a few hours he was done. It was quicker and easier than the daggers. Lucien said to himself, "Well, I mean, of course it's easier. I only had to do one set of enchantments." He took a hold of the arrow with on hand on the head of it and the arrow by the bottom. He tilted it slightly upwards and started examining it. He nodded his head. "This is perfect." He then closed his eyes and said trace on, gaining information on the arrow and storing the arrow away. When he was done he went outside into the yard and set up target practices, each a little further away from one another. He stood in front of his house and turned his skull ring into a bow. As he held the bow in one hand he used his new acquired magic to make a new arrow. He placed the arrow on the string of the bow and pulled it back and started taking aim. He took a deep breath and kept his hand steady. After a while Lucien released the arrow, causing it to fly and hit the closest target right in the center. As the arrowhead hit the center target it soon exploded, sending wood fragments flying everywhere. Seeing this Lucien smirked. "Oh yeah, this is awesome." He conjured another arrow and drew back on the string of the bow and took aim at the target that was a bit farther away, but as he did he grew a little more daring. He conjured one more arrow and placed it on top of the first arrow and continued to draw on the string. Lucien then released them, but instead of hitting the center it hit the place right on top and bottom of the center target. After a few seconds the target exploded with a big reaction, causing the wood pieces to come close to hitting him even though he was farther away from the target. Lucien gained an awkward expression when he saw the arrow not hit the center like he wanted. "It looks like I still need practice." Lucien then continued to conjure more arrows until he was almost out of magic and continued practicing until his arms felt heavy and couldn't draw his bow. As he was relaxing and catching his breath he saw a couple of birds flying about. One of them was seen flying a little too close to the ward that Medea has set up. When the bird got in between the two trees that were part of the ward it started getting electrocuted. It started spinning about in the air before it flopped down on the ground with smoke coming off its body. Lucien looked at the bird on the ground weirdly. This was the first time he has seen something die in front of him as the son of Hades. Maybe that was the reason he was drawn to it. Lucien got up from where he was standing and started walking towards the dead bird as if he was in a trance. When he got in front of it just a few steps away from exiting the ward he stopped. As he stopped he kept looking at the dead body of the bird with an ounce of an expression on his face. He then felt something deep within. His mouth opened on its own and the words just seemed to pour out, and in a deep subtle voice he said, "Arise." As those words came out of Lucien's mouth the shadow of the dead bird started to expand slightly. Out came a completely black bird that started flapping his wings slightly, but before Lucien had any chance to say anything or express his surprise his eyes rolled back to the back of his head and plopped to the ground. As Lucien lost consciousness the shadowy bird went and sank into Lucien's shadow, becoming one with it. Chapter 14. Third person's POF. When Lucien started opening his eyes he saw the ceiling of his room. He then quickly sat up and looked around. He saw to his side his mother landing her head in the bed asleep. Lucien gave a warm smile when he saw this. She must have found me knocked out in the field. Speaking of the field, what the hell was that? It felt like I was pulling something from the bird's shadow, Lucien thought with a pondering expression. Due to his previous movement Medea woke and looked at Lucien with an annoyed expression. "What did you do now? Didn't I saw that it was dangerous to be knocked out by magic exhaustion?" Lucien put his hands up in a surrendering position. "Before you can to reprimand me, just know that it wasn't my fault." Medea looked at Lucien with an accusatory look and raised an eyebrow at him. "If it isn't your fault, then who is?" My demigod abilities?" "What?" Medea asked while looking at him in confusion. Lucien then started explaining what occurred and what he last witnessed before losing consciousness. "So you didn't willingly do it?" Medea asked, to which Lucien shook his head. Lucien then felt something on him and said wait a minute. He closed his eyes and made that thing he felt on him to get off of him. As he did, the shadow bird came out from underneath him and started flying around before landing on his shoulder. Are you controlling it? Medea asked, bewildered, to which Lucien shook his head once again. I see. Medea said while examining it. It's a pure shadow construct with intelligence. Now that is fascinating. And you got from the dead body of a bird. I can see why you said it's from your demigod abilities. It's most definitely an aspect of your father's multiple abilities combined. Medea then wrapped her hands around it and closed her eyes. She started examining it with her magic, trying to figure out how it works. After a few minutes he released it, which caused the bird to fly and perch itself back on Lucien's shoulders. I see. It's a combination of everything, Medea said in wonder. Your affinity with the sun has made your abilities to interact with shadows at a much higher level. I'll try and explain what I learned just now of your abilities. This unique ability enables them to extract shadows from the deceased or defeated. It capitalizes on the concept that shadows are symbolic imprints of life and manifestations of a being's essence. The power operates independently of the soul, emphasizing the ephemeral nature of shadows and their detached connection to the true self. It's like controlling a ghostly echo of the person, without requiring their soul. Shadows, in essence, are mere reflections, not the real deal. This power taps into that residual imprint to command the shadow like a spectral sidekick. If that made sense. Lucien then began to ponder on his mother's words. Okay, I'll try to really simplify what you just said to make myself understand. In layman's terms, a shadow is a reflection created when light hits an object, such as the sun. I've got a strong connection to the sun because of my legacy. Now, with my inherited abilities from my dad, who can control shadows and command the dead, it takes things to a whole new level. What I pull out isn't exactly the soul, it's more like the reflection of that being. And once I extract it, that shadowy reflection becomes loyal to me. After he was done, Lucien looked at Medea for confirmation of what he said, to which Medea nodded her head. Before Lucien let out a sigh of relief, Medea interrupted. Don't get ahead of yourself. We don't know how dangerous this power could be or its limitations, so I want you to promise me that you will be careful when using it. Do I make myself clear? Lucien nodded his head. Yes, ma'am. Medea nodded and patted his long hair. Now then, come eat. You've been unconscious for a whole day, so you must be hungry. Lucien nodded and got up. As he got his feet back on the floor, he looked at the bird on his shoulder and noticed its species. It was a raven. Wait, a raven? I heard a bad omen. This can't be good, Lucien thought before putting it at the back of his head. He'll worry about it later once his stomach stops rumbling due to his hunger. As he kept thinking about the raven resting on his shoulder, he said, you know what, I'll give you a name. Bartholomew. Perfect. After Lucien went down and ate, he went back onto the forge and started making other arrows. But this time he changed the explosion enchantments and made 3 different arrows with 3 different effects. Flame/frost/shock damage adds elemental damage to the arrow, causing additional fire, frost, or shock damage upon impact. As he made each individual arrow, he whispered the right words in order for them to work, each in Latin, as to try and broaden his horizon in magic and gain experience. Exadska, which is an enchantment related to fire, meaning flame, take fire, become heated, burst out into a blaze, light up, kindle. Gelis, which is an enchantment related to frost, meaning frost, cold, coldness, chill, chillness, ice. Impulsor, which is a state of being shocked and has no other translation, but with the right intent behind his words it gets the enchantment working like how it's supposed to. As he was finishing everything, he failed to notice Medea looking at him with a melancholy expression. Watching Lucien work so hard, all she could do was watch him with a proud smile at how much he's grown and how strong he has become in such a short time. She doesn't have a single doubt that Lucien would continue to grow stronger and become one of the strongest demigods to ever live. But she knows she won't be alive to see it. She won't be there to watch her son grow up and become the handsome man he will become. That would be her punishment for escaping death for so long. That's a punishment so harsh that not even the judges of the underworld would have thought of it. She won't be there when he kills his first monster. She won't be there when he goes to his day of school, which he didn't allow him to go due to certain reasons. She won't be there when he gets his heart broken by a girl. She won't be there when he finds a girl he falls in love with. She won't be there to watch him do many of his firsts. With a look back, she looks at Lucien still concentrating on his arrows and retreats back to the room to prepare. Chapter 15. Chapter 15. Medea's Puff. After checking the time, I realized it's 11 p.m., meaning I only have an hour left. I have to break the news to Lucien. If I had done this earlier it would have been extremely difficult to say goodbye. I don't know if it would have been on him or on me. With a heavy heart I sat up from my bed and made my way towards Lucien's room that was right next to mine. As I sneaked my way inside I couldn't help but smile looking at his position. He's all spread out with his limbs everywhere. He's always been a messy sleeper. I sat on his bed and watched his steady breathing and I couldn't help but let out a tiny chuckle hearing him snore so peacefully. I moved his long black hair out of his face softly as I whispered him awake. "Lucy honey, we need to talk. It's important." Lucien's eyes snapped wide open. "Lucy?" he asked, his voice sounding deep as he just woke up. His expression then got serious. He tried to get up and look at me. "You only call me girly names when it's something serious. What's wrong?" "It's best if you put on your sandals and meet me outside." "I'll wait, but don't take too long," I said, trying to not make him nervous or expressing my anxiousness. It was quick as Lucien started following close behind me as I got outside in the middle of the night. As soon as we got outside Lucien wrapped his arms around himself due to the sudden coldness as he was just wearing black shorts and a white t-shirt. My lips couldn't help but soften when I saw him. "I know you're cold honey, but bear with me on this. It's really important." "All right, you're now acting weird." "What happened?" "You're starting to worry me," Lucien said, his expression staying serious. He just looked so adorable it was hard to actually take him seriously for most of the time. I took my little Lucy by surprise when I sat down on the ground and patted the grass next to me. "Come and sit." After looking at me weirdly he nodded and sat down. We looked at the sky for a few seconds as I then spoke. "Lucien, how old do you think I am?" Lucien looked a bit bewildered and asked nervously, "Is this a trick question? 'Cause if it is you don't look a day over 20. Anyone who saw us would think we were brother and sister." Chuckling I shook my head. "No silly, I meant seriously, how old do you think I truly am?" Lucien then got into a position he always does when he goes deep into his thoughts. He puts a hand on his chin and goes into deep thought, forgetting the world around him for a few seconds. "All I truly know is that it's more than 3,000 years old," Lucien said after thinking about it for a while. 3,200 I correct. "Damn," he said in a low-pitched voice. I responded with an unamused look which just turned into a sigh. "Sorry," he said, sounding nervous and looking at me for a reaction. He let out a sigh of relief when he just saw me shake my head at his antics. "Anyways, as you can tell I'm pretty old." "That's an understatement," he muttered under his breath. "What?" I asked while narrowing my eyes in his direction, which causes him to flinch. "Sorry," he squeaked out. Rolling my eyes I just continued as I was saying, "As you can tell I'm pretty old." Which shouldn't be possible. I looked in his direction to see his reaction and he just stared at me, studying my face, trying to see where I was going with this. "No mortal has lived as long as I have. Some tried to, but your father and the god of death would always be able to find them and they would be punished heavily for it. It is something your father seriously hates, such instances like Sisyphus, as I told you his story before." I explained, to which he nodded, remembering the lessons I taught him about the gods and heroes. Seeing him nodding I continued, "You see, I had help. The only reason I'm still alive is thanks to the fates. They came to me one day back in the old days when the gods were more active. They held a string which I guess represented my life and said almost mockingly, 'We have decided to let you live for a couple of years. We decided to intervene just this once in someone's fate. As for the reason, you will meet a god and give birth to a demigod who will be important to us. That's all you are allowed to know.' Stupid hags, they said. A couple of years, but they kept me alive for 3 millennia. Lucien was now looking at me with his mouth wide open, which caused me to chuckle. I wrapped my arm around his head and kissed the top of it. I then leaned my head downwards towards his and said, "And I couldn't have been more happy. You are and will always be the greatest gift those gods have given me. Anyways, after you were born they stopped helping, which at the time meant my time and usefulness to them was done. You see, when you turned 1 year old and asked me who your father was, he came and visited me when I told you his name. He was able to find me thanks to it. You don't have to feel guilty or anything for asking. I was going to get in contact with him anyways. During our talk we came to an agreement. He would allow me to stay with you for only 6 more years, which was a perfect time frame. When I let go of him, although he tried to hide it, it was obvious what I said made him emotional due to his eyes getting watery." Lucien then wrapped his arms around his knee and his lips started trembling slightly. "So how many?" he managed to say with a bit of pain behind his voice. I tilted my head in confusion. "What? How many days do you have to live?" he asked with tears streaming down his face, which I don't think he noticed. "So you figured it out, huh?" I said with a sigh. You couldn't have been more obvious. The dates line up to now and it's all making sense. The reason I was rushing all my work recently, the random raven that suddenly popped out of nowhere, and now you are talking about your life, which I doubt you're just telling me about since you feel nostalgic, Lucien said while biting his lips. So how many? He asked me once again. With a sigh I told him, a few minutes. As soon as I said this he snapped his head towards my direction. What? And you're only telling me this now? He stood up with his fist clenched and stood in front of me and continued yelling and pouring out his grievances. Why are you only telling me this now? We could have spent so much time together. Instead I spent the rest of our time together in that stupid forge. It truly pains me to see him like this. He always acts and sounds so matured I sometimes forget he's just a child. I could already feel my eyes brimming with tears as I stood up and wrapped my arms round him. I couldn't. I said, choking on my words. I wanted to let you know sooner, but it would have made our goodbye so much harder. Our tears wouldn't stop flowing as we stayed hugging each other. With each sob the hugs got tighter and tighter. I then felt it was my time. Wiping away my tears I knelt down to Lucien's eye level and held his face. Okay Lucy, listen and listen well, cause I don't have much time. I left you some money under the floorboard in my room next to my bed. It should last you a few years if you spend it wisely. It has both mortal money and drachma. I know it's irresponsible of me, but I want you to make a long journey to Long Island. There you will find a camp that's filled with demigods. It's called Camp Half-Blood. It's a place your father wants you to go to. And during your journey I want you to gain experience fighting monsters and how to survive. I know you, Lucien. I know your strength. I know your abilities and I know your skills. Heck, I taught you most of them. So I also know you will survive. Will you be injured and experience pain? Undoubtedly. But I have no doubt in my mind you will emerge victorious. I then felt my legs start turning into dust making its way towards my torso. Hades has taken a hold of me, which means Lucien has officially turned 7 years old. I kissed Lucien's forehead and pressed my forehead against his as I looked into his black eyes filled with tears. Lucien, I love you, sweetie. And happy birthday. And with that I close my eyes, accepting my fate. For those wondering, I'm doing this fic with my Spider-Man 1 tomorrow, and the day after that it's my JJK fic with my Is fic. Chapter 16. Chapter 16. Third person's Poff. Tears streamed down Lucien's cheeks as his mother turned into golden dust. He dropped to his knees as tears kept on falling. He knew he would get to see if went towards the underworld and speak to his father, but that doesn't change the fact that she's dead and he will miss her greatly. And who even knows when he would get the chance to go to the underworld. Lucien spent minutes mourning the loss of his mother, to the point he popped a blood vessel in his eyes. Lucien kept on crying until he ran out of tears. After catching his breath from his heavy crying, Lucien grabbed a handful of the golden dust and carried it inside without an ounce of an expression on his face. The only thing discernible about him was his puffy red eyes and red lining on his face, showing the trails of which his tears took. While inside, Lucien started looking around the house for a small bag. Once he found a small leather bag inside his mother's, he emptied what was inside and put the golden dust inside of it and closed it. When he finished, he turned to what was in the leather bag. It appears to just be a shiny jewel which Lucien picked up. After looking at it for a few seconds, he just put it on the nightstand next to her bed. He picked the leather bag and tied a small string to it and turned it into a little necklace which Lucien put on. He took a hold of the little bag that was on his neck and closed his eyes as his lip trembled slightly. He knew he had to do one more thing before his strength left him and he collapses and falls asleep, hoping this would all be a nightmare. He went into the kitchen and started making a meal. As he was making it, tears started forming in his eyes. He started to feel alone once again. A feeling he was really starting to hate. After a couple of minutes of cooking his offering, he was done and started cleaning the kitchen and everything he used. When he was done with that, he went with the food outside and set up a fire. He threw the entire meal into the fire and prayed like he never prayed before. Dad, please, I beg of you, take care of my mother. Lucien then heard a grunt inside his head, causing his eyes to widen. She is going to be put to work for her crimes of escaping death, but don't worry, I'll make sure she's treated fairly. Lucien just stared at the fire in shock. That's the first time his dad has ever talked to him, which was something he didn't expect. Lucien's expression gained a small soft smile, feeling thankful. Thank you was all he said to that. Hades didn't respond to that. After putting out the fire, Lucien reluctantly turned around and headed inside. When he closed the door, he took a few quick breaths to calm his breathing and went towards his room. When he got into bed he wrapped himself in his blankets, closed his eyes tightly, and took a hold of the small bag. "Happy birthday to me," Lucien whispered to himself before falling into a deep sleep, feeling tired after his stressful day. 1 month later, Bartholomew flew around Lucien's room before he started peeking Lucien in the face, waking him up from his slumber. He swatted Bartholomew out of his face while muttering, okay, I get it already, you stupid bird, you can leave me alone now, I'm awake now." Lucien then slowly sat up on his bed and sighs. It has been a month since Medea's departure from this world, and the pain doesn't get easier. It's not a pain that simply goes away or lessens. Lucien has simply started getting used to the feeling. He wakes up and does his daily routines. When he is done he starts eating breakfast by himself. After he was finished, he cleaned his plate, and sighed to himself while doing it. When he put the plate away he looked around and realized how dirty the house was becoming. "I should just get this over with. Mom would have definitely yelled at me if she realized how dirty I let the place become," Lucien said to himself with a small smile. And he went and started cleaning the entire house, going room by room, making sure everything was spotless until he stood in front of his mother's room, the only place he hasn't entered throughout the entire month. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath before entering the room. It looked the same as when he last left it. He then started to clean it. As he was cleaning he took a step which caused the floor to make a creaking noise. Hearing this, Lucien intentionally stepped on it again, causing the floor to creak again. Lucien put down the broom he had in his hands and knelt on the floor on one knee. He then started examining the floor and noticed an empty space to the side of a floorboard. The space was only wide enough where one could fit their finger inside. Curious, he fit his finger inside and lifted the floorboard and moved it to the side. What he saw inside left him somewhat speechless. "That's right. She did say she left me money so I can make my way towards Camp Half-Blood, didn't she?" Lucien said after looking at the multiple bags of gold, which were drachma. As Lucien picked one of the bags to examine them, he saw that underneath the drachmas laid stacks of dollars all neatly arranged. Lucien couldn't help but shake his head and chuckle at his mother's choices. Why didn't she just buy a safe or something? Why are they on the floor? Ha ha ha. As he held the bag of coins in his hands he sighed once again. "I guess this is a sign. It's time I made my way to camp. But how in the underworld am I supposed to carry all this?" Bartholomew then came flying and perched himself on Lucien's shoulders. "Not now, Bartholomew, I'm thinking here. Why don't you go and rest in my Lucien snapped his fingers. "That's right. My shadow." Lucien looked down onto his shadow and dropped the bag he was holding. The bag just fell and made some noise before just staying there. Lucien just looked at the bag with an awkward expression. "Right, I'm supposed to activate it." Lucien controlled his shadow, making it take a hold on the bag of money and pull it inside his shadow. Lucien let out a sigh of relief when he realized he could feel it in his shadows. He made more tendrils of shadows appear and wrap themselves around the other bags of coin and pull them inside. Lucien nodded his head when he felt all 20 bags of gold drachma. He then willed his shadow to consume the dollar bills, leaving the floor bare without anything inside. Lucien made the shadow tendrils wrap themselves around the floorboard and move it back in place. When he was done he resumed cleaning, leaving the place spotless, then went to pack what he would need. Lucien went to his room and grabbed a bag and started filling it up with clothes and all utilities he would need. When he was done with that he went and took a shower. When he was done he got dressed and stood in front of the mirror in his room. He was wearing long black saggy pants, a white shirt underneath with a black hooded over it. He tied his long black hair into a messy bun and smiled at himself in the mirror. "Looking good. Must be another power of being a demigod," he said to himself while looking at his 4 canine-like teeth, giving him a tiny bit of a savage look. When he was done admiring himself, he slowly exited the house, looking at everything on more time to remember it. Lucien stood in front of his childhood home and looked at it for a bit before sighing and looking ahead. He slowly walked towards the edge of the ward Medea made to keep them safe and stood in front of the boundary line. He took a deep breath and took a step outside, finally leaving the safety of his home. Chapter 17. Chapter 17. Third person's POF. Lucien was seen running for his life as he was being chased by a group of 5 Laestrygonians. "I literally only took a step outside and I'm already being chased. This world sucks ass. Come back here, yummy demigod," one of the Laestrygonians shouted at Lucien. Yeah, come here, we promise to season you well," another one called out. "You guys are cannibals, aren't you? Why don't you just eat each other?" Lucien yelled while running through the forest and in between trees. But due to their size the giants were slowly catching up to him as they were covering more ground. Lucien turned his head and looked behind and saw one of the giants running quickly and stretching out his hand ready to grab him. Lucien clicked his tongue and decided to get creative. He turned his ring into a chain scythe and spun it a few times and threw it to the side, wrapping itself around a tree. And as it did, Lucien jumped to the side. As he did, the giant that was gaining on him tripped on the chain, causing him to fall and face plant on the ground. Seeing his opportunity, Lucien quickly got up as he fell and willed his chain scythe to turn into its default form, a scythe. When he arrived before the cannibal, it already put his hands in a position to get up, but Lucien didn't let him. He swung his scythe from underneath him, decapitating it, causing it to slowly turn into dust. Lucien turned his head and saw that the other Laestrygonians were already before him, but he wasn't as scared as he previously was. In fact, he had a large smile on his face, showing his canines. The reason why he was smiling and wasn't as scared as he was before isn't because there is one less enemy to worry about. Well, maybe that, but no, the main reason is because he just gained a useful ally. Arise! Lucien yelled, causing the shadow of the previous slain Laestrygonians to manifest itself right where it turned into dust. It appeared at the perfect moment as the other Laestrygonians soon arrived, surrounding Lucien. Lucien willed the shadow Laestrygonian to pick him up as the other Laestrygonians rushed towards him in a timely manner. Throw me! Lucien commanded, and the Laestrygonian did just that. As it threw him towards one of the giants in front of him, he willed his scythe to turn into a spear and impale the spear right on the giant's forehead, causing it to also turn into dust. But what Lucien didn't consider, however, was how hard his Laestrygonian threw him. As Lucien went right through its forehead, he didn't slow down and ended up crashing against a tree, causing air to escape his lungs, which gave the other giants the perfect opportunity to come running towards him. A gasp! Rise! Lucien yelled out while trying to catch his breath. I'm such a dumbass, Lucien thought. Another shadow giant appears, turning the previous 5 cannibalistic giants into a 3. Lucien willed the 2 giants to hold off 2 out of the 3 remaining giants, leaving 1 for him to deal with. The 2 shadow giants started throwing punches at their opponents, angering them. Where did they come from? One of them yelled and threw a punch to his shadow counterpart. Maybe if we eat the yummy demigod they will go away. Another one responded while trying to grapple his opponent. Get in my stomach, the third one yelled while bending down to grab Lucien. Lucien, who was still trying to catch his breath, slowly lifted himself and pushed his leg, rolling underneath the giant that was trying to grab him. As he rolled, he willed his spear to turn into a sword. He got out of the roll, spun around and slid slightly on his knees. He swung his sword at its Achilles heels, causing it to roar in pain. Ugh! Noticing it couldn't get up, it used its hand to turn himself around and backhand Lucien. Lucien managed to block most of it by turning his sword to the side, but he was still sent flying. Lucien ended up going through some trees, causing him to vomit blood. He slowly stood on one knee and pushed himself to get up while shaking slightly due to the pain. He coughed some blood, but he still held on and stood up. He willed his sword to turn into a bow and whispered projection, conjuring an explosion arrow. The giant that was on his knees turned towards Lucien's direction and started using his arms and hands to propel him with an angry expression on its face. Seeing the giant fast approaching almost freaked Lucien out, but surprisingly the pain kept him sane. He took a deep breath and held it to stop his shaking and drew on the bowstring with the arrow in the middle of it. He released his breath as he released his grip on the string, causing the arrow to fly and lodge itself on the giant's forehead. It stopped moving and the arrow exploded, causing the head of the giant to explode as a consequence, turning it dust. Lucien felt his magic start to deplete and looked over to the other giants. Lucien saw one of them beating one of his shadows with a boulder. The shadow attempted to reconstruct himself, but the giant would smash the boulder on the shadow's head again and again. It would slam the boulder down and pick it back up again and slam it again. Lucien clicked his tongue and said arise while running through his pain towards the giant. Lucien willed the newly constructed shadow to help the other shadow that was having a fist fight and also depleting his magic. When Lucien arrived before the giant wielding a boulder, he willed his bow to turn into a boat staff and slammed it on the giant's knee, causing a popping sound to be heard. It roared in pain, releasing the boulder holding its knee. It gave the shadow giant time to construct itself and pick up the boulder it was previously being hit with and get revenge by slamming the Laestrygonian with its own boulder, squashing its head, making it pop. Arise! Lucien demanded, causing a 4th shadow giant to appear. Lucien pointed to the 2 shadow giants fighting the last remaining Laestrygonians and with a crazed smile showing his bloody teeth and fangs said jump him, causing the other 2 shadow giants to run towards their direction. All 4 shadows started punching and kicking the remaining living giant. causing it to cry in unwillingness and unfairness of the situation. Lucien rested the boat staff by both his shoulders and put his arms over them, resting them. He continued to watch everything with a smile. And with a kick and punch from everyone at the same time, the last Laestrygonians turned into dust. Slowly walked towards where the giants surrounded the area and said arise, causing the fifth and last shadow giant to appear. As he did, he dropped to his knees and slightly coughed up blood. He used the staff as support and slowly stood and adjusted his position. He sat down on the floor and laid his staff on his lap. Lucien started to hold his side in pain. I think I broke a couple of ribs, he groaned. With a sigh, he summoned the bag from his shadow where he packed up everything and started rummaging through everything he packed, such as his clothes, the arrows he made, the 2 golden daggers, and finally some potions his mother made. He picked up a blood-red potion from his bag and uncapped it. He slowly drank it, which made his eyes start getting heavy. He turned towards the 5 giants and said, protect me while I rest, to which surprisingly they nodded their heads and stood in a circular formation. Lucien was too hurt and tired to think about it, so he just laid his back by a tree and closed his eyes, falling asleep. Chapter 18. Chapter 18. Third person's POF. When Lucien opened his eyes, he could barely make out his surroundings. It seems he was in some sort of underground cave. What? I was just sleeping in the woods. How the hell did I end up underground, he thought before hearing a hissing noise behind him. He quickly turned round and found a large woman with 8 eyes, mandible, sharp teeth, and from the waist down the bottom half of a spider. Lucien looked at this in shock. He tried to say something but the words wouldn't come out. Arachne? Is this one of those demigods' dream things where they can view the events of the past, present, and or future? Hiss, my little darlings, I have a job for you, Arachne said with a wicked smile on her face, addressing the little spiders around her. Why the hell am I even seeing this? I'm not a child of Athena. Why should this be any of my concern? I have become aware of another spawn of Athena, she said with hate in her voice. Go to Virginia where the spawn of Athena lays and eat her alive, for she. Before Lucien could hear anything else, his body began to shake back and forth, prompting him to wake up. When Lucien woke up, he noticed his shadow giant shaking him awake. He pinched the bridge of his nose as he asked, what is it? The shadow giant just pointed his finger upwards. When Lucien followed the direction of its finger with his gaze, he saw a swarm of pigeon birds start to circle the area where he was previously sleeping. Lucien narrowed his eyes trying to get a better view, when he suddenly noticed the birds started tucking in their wings and diving towards his direction. Lucien got up and jumped out the way as a bird with its metallic beak dove beak first where he was sitting. Lucien remembers seeing them in the book his mother gifted him, Stymphalian birds. As he dove out the way, Lucien still winced in pain. It looks like I'm not entirely healed. Lucien pointed his palm towards the bird's direction and tightened it into a fist, causing the ground to move and take a hold of the bird's beak, holding in place. But as he did, more and more birds started diving towards his direction, trying to injure him. Lucien willed the giants not to do anything as he wanted to try out something. As the birds kept getting closer, Lucien narrowed his eyes waiting for them to get closer. Now, he thought as he willed his shadow to turn into tendrils and skewer themselves into the birds. One by one the tendrils started penetrating the birds, causing them to fall out of the sky, laying there dead. Seeing that some of them were still in the air and not coming down, Lucien used his tracing and projection magic abilities and conjured 6 daggers, the same amount as birds in the sky. He waved his arms and controlled them to start following the birds that were trying to escape, killing them when he got up with them. Lucien then looked at the bird that still had his beak on the ground and willed the earth to swallow it whole, burying it underground. Lucien tightened his fist again, causing blood to make the dirt around it moisten. But Lucien didn't pay any attention to that anymore. He sat on the ground and made the giants start collecting the bodies of the birds and bring them to him alongside any sticks and small rocks they find. Before anything else, Lucien said rise, causing a total of 20 bird shadows to appear and sink into his own shadow. When the shadow giants finished, Lucien started building a campfire. Once he was done, he held out his palm towards it and said Ignis fatui, meaning will-o-wisp or small fire, shooting a small flame towards the campfire, turning it on. Lucien basically made his shadow giants pluck, skin, gut, and bleed out the birds and put them on a stick where he proceeded to cook some of them, storing the rest for later. Lucien went into his bag and started looking through its different pockets. Now where did I put it? This was something I told myself to never leave home without. Aha! Lucien exclaimed, pulling out a salt and pepper shaker. After seasoning his food and eating his lunch, Lucien put everything away and left just one giant available. Lucien proceeds to then make that giant pick him up and put him on its shoulder and start walking through the forest. While being carried through the forest, Lucien kept thinking about the dream he previously had. Was that a sign for me to go to Virginia? But why? I literally have nothing to do with Athena or her children. I know I should just ignore it, but the curiosity is now killing me. Luckily for Lucien, after a couple hours of walking through the forest, he didn't find any monsters. He soon found the exit, much to his excitement. Finally. Although I wasn't walking, it was boring, Lucien complained. When he exited the forest, he saw a sign that said Hoffman Forest, North Carolina. Now I just need a fucking map and I'll know just where to go. He patted the shadow giant on the shoulder and pointed towards a random direction down a highway. Onward, my friendly giant, to the nearest gas station, to infinity and beyond. After almost an hour of walking down Jacksonville, a street of North Carolina, Lucien saw a gas station, and let out a sigh of relief. None of the people there batted an eye when they saw Lucien riding the shoulder of a shadowy giant, probably because of the mist that separates the mortal world from the supernatural. To everyone else, it probably just looks like a dad carrying his son on his shoulder going to walk. When Lucien entered the gas station, he let out another sigh of relief when he saw a bunch of large paper maps on a shelf. He wheeled the shadow giant, who after all this time Lucien decided to name Larry the Laestrygonian. Anyways, he willed Larry to pick up a paper map and take it to the front, where he proceeded to pay for it. After he was done paying, Lucien willed Larry to pass him the map and to go outside. When Lucien took the paper map, he unfolded it and looked at it for a few seconds. He flipped it around, turned it sideways and closed and opened it again before closing it again with a sigh. I forgot I have fucking dyslexia. Chapter 19. Third person's POF. Lucien willed Larry to go to an alleyway and put him down. He summoned his bag from his shadow and started rummaging through it once again. I should really organize this. I just picked everything I would find useful and shoved it inside. Books. No, I don't need that at the moment. Underwear. Next. More books. Is this paprika? I forgot I packed that, but not what I was looking for. Ah, here it is. Lucien said as he took out the enchanted glasses his mother gifted him and put them on. Okay, here we go. Now where was I? Lucien grabbed the map and started reading it. Okay, so I'm here in North California and the Spider Woman said Virginia, which is here the next state over. Wait, let's think this logically. This is the Percy Jackson universe. I knew that for a fact when Hecate mentioned the pact between the big three and Mother explained the mist that separated the two realities, which was why I made the bet with Hecate in the first place. Now looking at Richmond in Virginia and Arachne talking about the spawn of Athena in Virginia, it's definitely talking about Annabeth Chase. Cool, I guess. But the thing about it is that she doesn't get attacked by the spiders for 3 nights until after Thanksgiving and meeting Magnus Chase, her cousin who is also a demigod of the Norse pantheon. So the whole thing about Arachne doesn't happen until a couple of months from now, and it's freaking July. The thing with Arachne couldn't have happened now or in the past, it must have been the future. So there's no point of me rushing over there. Cool. That just means I can absolutely take my time and train my abilities with monsters and the likes. I especially need to practice my abilities controlling the mist. Lucien pondered, looking at everything on the map. Lucien snapped his neck towards the direction of the roar and saw an automaton, a lion automaton to be more specific. Most of them were machines brought to life by Hephaestus, which later on went haywire and started attacking mostly anything in sight due to damage to their circuitry. Lucien, seeing this, smirked. This is gonna be fun. He pulled everything back into his shadow including his glasses and turned his skull ring into a bow staff. Lucien started twisting and twirling the bow staff in his hands before putting it by his armpits and getting into a fighting stance. He taunted the metal lion with hand, "Come here, little kitty cat," which caused the lion to make another roar and rush towards him. Seeing it running towards him, Lucien also ran towards it. Lucien swung his boat staff, hitting it right on the side of its face, making it turn its head. It just turned its head right back and slashed its metallic claws, which Lucien tried to block by putting the staff in front of him. Lucien was brought to his knees with a grunt, making him realize the physical difference between them. He rolled to the side when he realized he couldn't keep it up much longer, causing the lion to slash its claws against the pavement, leaving a large claw mark imprinted on it. Lucien positioned his staff upwards on the ground. He made the earth surround the bottom of it, holding in place, and in that same action used the staff to vault himself towards the lion, kicking it on its metal face with both his feet, pushing it back slightly. The lion roared once more and opened its mouth. From its mouth it started releasing fire like a flamethrower. Lucien took the staff off the ground once he landed and started spinning it in front of himself, turning it into a fan, stopping the flames from approaching him. Sweat started dripping down from his face due to the intensity of the heat. When the lion closed its mouth and the flames stopped coming out, Lucien dropped his staff. Oh, he screamed while shaking and blowing on his hands. The lion, seeing this as the perfect opportunity, jumped with a roar ready to sink its teeth into him. Lucien gritted his teeth and picked up the staff. He lodged the staff right in its mouth, leaving it wide open, unable to close it. Lucien touched the ground and made it surrounded and grabbed onto the lion's legs and paws, making it unable to escape. The lion tried to burn a pole with its mouth flamethrower but was unable. Lucien willed his shadow to turn into a tentacle and shot it towards the lion's open mouth and penetrate the core of its being. Lucien, using his shadow tentacle, took a hold of the staff and brought it to his shadow before he proceeded to infuse his legs with his shadow power and leap into the air, jumping to the roof of a building while doing a roll to land safely, leaving behind the black wispy trail. Boom! Lucien heard the automaton below him explode due to its core being destroyed, making him smirk. Lucien 1, automaton 0. Now I better leave. Setting off an explosion near a gas station is likely to attract unwanted attention. Now all I have to do is learn how the hell I freaking jumped and landed on top of here, cause that was freaking awesome. And I can't get down without any help. But before anything else, Lucien sighed and summoned Larry and made him carry him down again where the lion exploded. Arise, he said with a smirk, waiting for the lion to answer his call. But nothing appeared. The smirk on his face faltered. I said rise, Lucien demanded in a louder voice. But just like previously, nothing happened. Lucien stood there looking at the busted metal and scorched ground for a few seconds. Are you kidding me? I can't make automatons into my shadow soldiers? What type of bullshit is this? Is it cause it's not organic or some shit? Lucien grew irritated and made Larry jump into the top buildings again before making him jump buildings to try and get away until there were any more buildings to jump onto. Lucien made Larry land on the ground and summoned his bag once again from his shadows once he realized no one was around. TCH, although I can't make automatons my soldiers, I did learn some things, so it wasn't that bad, Lucien thought while he opened his bag and started looking for something inside. Clothes, more clothes. Ah, here it here is, Lucien said as he pulled out a book, the first book his mother gave him alongside his glasses. He stored the bag away and started flipping through the book in his hands with a pen he stored in the middle of it. Lucien flipped the book all the way towards a page that said Shadow Powers. Okay, he said while tapping his pen on the page. I forgot to update this. Now I got to add shadow storage with Shadow Leap, or do I call it Shadow Jump, and that I can't summon automatons to do my bidding. Lucien started pacing back and forth while walking in circles. What more could I do with my shadow? Lucien thought while continuously clicking his pen. When I was with Mom, I was focusing on too many things to properly focus on different ways to use my shadow. I had to focus on my weapon wielding, my magic lessons, potion lessons, mythology lessons, and the magic ones had multiple parts to it too. I could use this time to try out different things, like how I could shape it and into what I could shape it into. How strong does it fare against monsters and how I could use it in battle. Lucien, while was pacing around, he noticed that it was getting darker, causing him to sigh. What a hectic day it has been, and it's only my first day out. But I'm liking this. I can feel myself getting better. It's a slow process, but I can feel it and I'm getting excited for it. But for now it's time I find a hotel to stay at if I don't want to spend the night outside. Lucien got on top of Larry once again and started down Jacksonville. After a few minutes of walking, Lucien saw a sign that said Pumpkin Center and just continued walking downwards. Real places, by the way. I had to ask Google Maps for this shit, so respect the dedication I'm putting into this. It was soon the middle of the night. Just as Lucien was about to give up and just sleep outside, Lucien saw an inn, which upon closer inspection was a 2-star Inn that read Roadway Inn and Suites Jacksonville near Camp Lejeune. Freaking finally, Lucien sighed. He willed Larry to enter. As he entered, he decided to really start practicing using the mist. He remembered one of the lessons his mother used to teach him when using the mist against mortals and regular people. Remember, make them see and hear what they want to see and hear. Lucien closed his eyes and started concentrating on the mist surrounding them. What they want to see and hear, Lucien repeated in his head. They want to see a family renting a room. Lucien started expressing his intent towards the mist and it soon followed his will. The innkeeper at the front desk looked up from his desk and saw a regular buff man with a little boy on his shoulder looking stern. What can I do for you today, sir? And the man then started speaking in a gruff voice matching his appearance. "My son and I are looking for a room to rent to spend the night." "Just for one night, sir?" the innkeeper asked with a smile. The man with the little boy on his shoulder nodded his head. The innkeeper nodded his head as well and told him the price, which made the man reach into his pocket and pull the amount he needed. The innkeeper then turned around and grabbed a key from the wall and handed it to the man. "Your key, sir, room 302. I hope you enjoy your stay," he said with a smile. The man nodded his head and started walking to the stairs. As Lucien willed Larry to walk up the stairs, he let out a sigh of relief. "Oh my God, that worked. I'm so freaking thankful." And with that, Lucien arrived at his room and willed Larry to return to his shadow and jumped into bed. Lucien fell asleep as quickly as he laid his head on the pillow due to being tired of his constant fighting. Chapter 20. Third person's POF. Lucien woke up the next morning feeling more energized and in less pain. Luckily his hotel room had a bathroom, so he did his usual morning routine and got ready. He then sat back onto the bed and took out his book and went towards the page where he kept a list of his powers and his different ideas for them. "I used the shadows and enveloped my legs to jump that high, but what else could I do with it? Can I lower my presence by enveloping myself in it? But I could need to do it by someone to see if they can't detect me." Lucien started writing his ideas and thoughts on the matter related to his demigod powers. "But I can't just completely focus on them, I also have to continue training with my weapons and magic." Lucien sighed as he realized he had a lot to do. "Well, I'm not going to get it done by just sitting down," he thought as he put away the book. Lucien stood up from the bed, and just as he was about to exit he suddenly had a thought. "I haven't actually tried shadow travel yet. I should do it." Lucien closed his eyes and willed himself inside his shadow. Lucien then started moving inside his shadow, which he then realized was a mistake as he didn't have a destination set. Lucien felt himself moving so fast he didn't know which way was up or down, left or right. It all felt like he was running at super speed without any way of stopping. Lucien felt himself shot out from his shadow, and ended up crashing into a wall. Groaning, he slowly got up and looked around. He looked at what appeared to be crime scene investigation, and when he looked around some more he realized he was back where he fought the lion automaton. "Great, just what I needed to retrace my steps," Lucien groaned some more. "I'm too young to be having back problems. And my God, did that take a lot of me. I know it's supposed to be tiring to shadow travel, but I didn't think it would be this much." As Lucien leaned against the wall to get his bearings, he heard multiple footsteps coming towards his direction. He silently cursed to himself as he tried to use shadow travel once again. He closed his eyes and pictured the hotel room he was just at and sank back into his shadow. Lucien felt the same sensation as previously and tried to get the hang of it. He reappeared back onto the room and wobbled forward, tripping on his own 2 feet and landing back on the bed. "Definitely need more practice. Who knows where I would end up if I don't perfect it." Lucien decided to just walk out after his failed attempts and summoned Larry to carry him on his shoulder. Lucien started focusing on the mist once again, changing their appearance to what they were previously when he walked in and exited the hotel. No one was none the wiser. And so Lucien decided to walk and explore while very slowly making his way towards Virginia, making the months pass until it was late November. By the beginning of August, Lucien would have traveled to Richland, North Carolina. During his time there, Lucien started practicing his shadow travel and mostly practiced with the bow star fighting automaton he would meet along the way, even though he didn't gain any shadow soldiers. By then middle of it, Lucien would have arrived at Kingston, where he mostly started fighting using a bow. For practice, Lucien would summon his 20 shadow birds and make them fly around him, and he would try to shoot them down. Surprisingly, Lucien ended up encountering kins of lamias during his walk. They were monsters, spirits that would feast on small children, often regarded as demons. Unluckily for Lucien, they weren't the good-looking kind often depicted in his previous life and were quite grotesque. After a battle with his bow and arrow, Lucien ended up killing about 30 during his stay there, expanding his shadow army. By the beginning of September, Lucien arrived at Goldsboro and switched to the chain scythe for his main use and practice. During this time, Lucien started practicing other applications towards his shadow abilities. He figured out how to blend his presence, making him hard to detect. He named the technique Shadow Cloak and used it to explore the city without anyone paying him any attention. As he walked by a park, he encountered a large boar. It was so large that you just know it belongs to the supernatural world. Lucien ended up fighting it but got injured when one of its tusks made a large cut to the side of his stomach. Lucien had to lay low so he could recover for a few days. A scar is all that remains of their encounter, alongside a new shadow soldier. Switching to a spear, Lucien made it to a city called Rocky Mount by October. As the month progressed, Lucien became more and more proficient in his ability to shadow travel. It was to the point Lucien made a new move thanks to it. He called it Shadow Blink. He would encase just his feet with his powers of shadow and quickly appear by the shadows that were close by. Basically a short distance fast teleportation technique. Due to being in the city, Lucien didn't encounter monsters. Most of his opponents were mostly once again automatons of different animals. Lucien decided to spend most of this month exploring and enjoying him more than fighting and gaining experience, but that doesn't mean he slacked off. And it was finally November. Lucien turned his spear into a sword and took a step in front of him. Once he made his way forward, he took a deep breath. Virginia, I finally made it. What a painful journey that was. Lucien arrived at Emporia, Virginia. Lucien then thought of something funny to do. He went and looked around the city and found a grocery store. When he found it, he did his usual routine with Larry and made him carry a shopping cart inside. Lucien started buying ingredients for a large dinner. When he was done, he paid and exited the store, storing his bags inside his shadow. Lucien went and found an inn that allowed the use of a kitchen. It was quite a walk away, but with a bit of shadow travel Lucien arrived in no time. One of the things Lucien became aware of the mist, which he had forgotten due to how simple it was that he could disguise himself perfectly as an adult. So Lucien went in and paid for a room, settled in and went straight for the kitchen. After a few hours of joyous cooking, Lucien stored everything in his shadow. He went back to his room. Lucien set up a small protected fire and started offering most of the food he made, leaving a little bit for himself. He then started to pray with a smirk. Hey Dad, it's me Lucien, though you probably already know that. It's been a while since we last talked, after Mom's fiasco. Anyway, the reason for this offering is because it's November 2nd, the Day of the Dead, and so I wanted to say happy birthday. Lucien knows that the Day of the Dead is mostly a Mexican holiday, but he still did it for two reasons, trying to be funny and having someone to talk to. It has been a couple of months since he had any real interaction with anyone, and the loneliness was slowly getting to him. But surprisingly enough, Hades answered. I should punish you for such disrespect. Holy Hades. You actually answered. I wasn't expecting that. Lucien's eyes widened in surprise. HMMPH, why wouldn't I answer when my son is being an idiot? Why have you offered this much food? Hades scoffed at first before sounding angry. Persephone is going to make me eat it all. I can already guess what she's going to say. She's going to say something along the lines of not wasting your hard work and efforts and let it go to waste. Lucien smiled lightly at that. He still didn't know why Persephone was nice to him, but he didn't discourage it. You can share it with stepmother, you stepmother, Lucien said, still smiling. I barely have contact with you and you're already being a nuisance. Should I be worried for what the future has in store? Hades grumbled. Absolutely, Lucien said in pure confidence. There was a long silence before Lucien felt Hades leave his head. Did I just get hung up on by my own dad? Lucien asked himself with an awkward smile.